Howdy guys, Jimmy Song here. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Tech Talk. It is issue number 172, I think. It might be 173. Actually, I didn't check the number. Anyway, welcome to another episode. It's Monday, and I release my newsletter every Monday, and that's what this show is all about. Anyway, let me show you a couple of new things. I've switched from MailChimp to Substack, so you can now subscribe directly to jimmysong.substack.com. Not really happy with them at the moment because they did have some email trouble this morning, and my newsletter went out much later than it should have. But regardless of that, I like the fact that it's got the ability to like and comment and stuff like that, which hopefully gets a little more community engagement. Like Big Keto is saying in the live chat, please smash that like button so other people can see and hear about this show and know what's going on, all about the technical scene. Anyway, before I move on to actually reading that post and another read through and so on, I want to tell you that my book Programming Bitcoin is on Amazon, and if you click buy it now, you can get Programming Bitcoin on Amazon. My website, programmingbitcoin.com, also has a link to the Little Bitcoin book, which is also available on Amazon. And it's available in paperback, Kindle, audiobook. It's got 87 ratings, 5 stars. It's also got a Spanish version and a Portuguese version. We're working on Hindi, we're working on Arabic, we're working on Turkish, we're working on Vietnamese, we're working on Korean, we're working on Dutch and French and German. So it's going to be out in many, many different languages. So that's what we have at the moment. All right, so please take a look at those. In addition, I also have my seminar, Programming Blockchain. I'll be announcing the scholarship stuff later this week, but I will also have 2 more locations, which I'm announcing right now: Hong Kong and Antwerp. So we're going to do one in Asia and one in Europe. If you are interested in learning about programming Bitcoin stuff, you can learn directly from me in one of those 3 places. Anyway, let's get to the new format. This is I've noticed a trend towards newsletters that tell more of a story, and I thought that would be more interesting than just sort of like a straight bunch of links, especially if I put it in the context of all of the different things that are happening in Bitcoin. So I'm going to read through this newsletter, and for those of you who don't like to read or like more prefer listening to it. So here's the actual newsletter. Welcome to the new format for Bitcoin Tech Talk. Instead of shooting you links every week from now on, I'm going to handcraft a newsletter about Bitcoin from a technical perspective and give you more of a narrative of the stuff that I'm following in the Bitcoin space. The big news so far this year is the progress of Taproot, which is the next soft fork for Bitcoin. This is what you would call SegWit v1. It's got a whole lot of things in it, but the main things are Schnorr signatures, Taproot, TapScript, and the new spending rules for SegWit v1. These are all links to BIP 340, BIP 341, and BIP 342. I read through the entirety of BIP 340, Schnorr signatures, on my YouTube channel. I did that last Wednesday. I'll likely be doing something similar for BIP 341 this week, so please subscribe to be notified. My Bitcoin Tech Talk show last week covered the links along with the read-through of Plan B's efficient market hypothesis. If you missed that, please go take a look. I believe that the stock-to-flow model will be the talk of Bitcoin from an economics perspective for the next year and a half. And if you're not familiar with it, please read or reread his seminal posts on the topic. Stock-to-flow is going to be a major, major talking point, especially as we approach the halving. Essentially, I think the main claim of stock to flow is that once we hit the halving and the supply shock happens, there's a very strong probability that the price will go up significantly. And if it does, I think a falsification of the model would be if Bitcoin stays at this price somewhere into 2022. At that point, that would be falsified. So there are very clear indicators whether or not this model is correct. But anticipation of this model and sort of like evidence about this model, that's what everyone is going to be talking about for the next year and a half. So I don't want you guys to miss it. I have friends that are saying, based on the stock to flow model, a fair price right around the halving is somewhere around $13,000 to $20,000. We have no idea what it'll do, of course, but that's the sort of thing that we really need to think about. Besides Taproot, another big proposal got a BIP number. Check template verify from Jeremy Rubin. It is BIP 119. It's basically to smooth out the transaction fees during times of high congestion. So instead, right now, when an exchange is paying out like 100 customers, they need 100 outputs. That's 100 times like 40 something bytes. So that ends up being kind of expensive, right? Like 4K or whatever. It's a giant fee, and especially if it's a block where there's a lot of other transactions, that tends to not be very economically efficient. So what Check Template Verify does is it uses a simple covenant called a template. And basically, it allows for congestion control. So it commits to a certain degree of outputs and lets all of the recipients know. So they could pay for getting the money quicker if they choose by adding more fees. But they don't have to. But it'll get to them eventually if they so choose. So instead of the sender paying all of the fees, it's more we're pushing some of that to the recipient and allowing them to choose, okay, well, do I want to wait for this? It's committed on the blockchain, so they can't defraud you. But you have the ability to go and get it later. So, when the fees are a little less. So, really interesting stuff. Encourage you to take a look at BIP 119. BTC Pay announced BTC Pay Vault, which lets you connect the hardware wallet directly to your BTC Pay server's full node. It's very useful, especially for privacy and security for taking payments. Let me make this bigger. I just realized. But yeah, that's going to be something that I think will help a lot of merchants, especially with security. BTC Pay is open source. About the only thing that was a little tricky on it was doing the air cap. If you have a hardware wallet, like say a Cold Card or something like that, that'll make it super easy. Lightning. Besides Taproot, there's a lot of interesting developer-friendly things happening on Lightning. Tyrion debuted LSATs, which stands for Lightning Service Authentication Token. So the idea of LSATs is to make it really easy to pay for web content using Lightning, or maybe even a web app or something like that. Payment invoice is embedded into the HTTP header. So there's an extra HTTP header that has the Lightning invoice in it. And once you pay, then you get access, then you get the response. So it's very much like it's very much like a 402 payment required, and that's the big thing about it. The other major announcement was Square, who announced the Lightning Development Kit. The actual code isn't released yet, but anything that helps developers onboard into creating Lightning apps is very welcome. So this is Square's focus. You know that they hired Matt Corallo and a bunch of other really good developers that are there now. They're working on Lightning and making sure that people know there's an easy path to making apps on Lightning and so on. Economics. From an economics point of view, Stephen Livera has published an excellent post on Mises.org debunking monetary velocity theorists. This is the infamous PQ equals MV equation. And basically, he's debunking that from the perspective of crypto economics and saying, see, it didn't work for altcoins, so therefore it's probably not valid. This is a great read from an Austrian perspective. Charles Edwards points out that Bitcoin may very well have been anticipated by Henry Ford with the energy standard. I had no idea that was a thing, but Henry Ford had famously said something about, if the people in this country knew how money worked, they would all be up in arms about it. Well, he had a proposal for some sort of an energy standard, which is a currency backed by energy, and that's essentially what Bitcoin is, though in a slightly roundabout way. Parker Lewis continues his excellent series gradually, then suddenly, arguing why markets naturally collapse towards a single currency. And his argument, I think, is pretty sound. Essentially, it's that there are network effects to having money, and if you're using like 7 different currencies, it's not very efficient, and it's harder to price, and it may like liquidity is reduced and stuff. Everyone wants the biggest liquidity pool and the most convenient method. So it ends up converging very, very quickly. Bitcoin Cash came out with a developer tax this week. So essentially what that does is it forces Bitcoin Cash miners to give 12.5% of the miner reward for 6 months. And that and they're going to enforce it by orphaning blocks that aren't. So this implies basically that they have more than 50% of the BCH hash rate, the people that are signers to that, which include Roger Ver, Jihan Wu, and a couple of others. But between them, they apparently have more than 50%, so they can orphan the blocks. This is a forced tax. I'll talk more about it probably next week, but there are several even BCH people that are very much against this developer tax. So we'll see where it goes, but it may be a very big event because it might cause yet another fork of BCH. I also wrote about their very deceitful claim that the tax would essentially be paid by BTC miners. Their claim is deceitful because they're the only one. They're only taking very specific first order effects into account and not any of the others. So we'll do a read through of that, which I wrote on Medium. It's at some point I'm gonna have to figure out exactly how to consolidate all of my social media presence. But let me show you some of these links. This is BIP 340. Again, I did a read through and basically explained a lot of it in my other video. Please check that out. This is BIP 341. This is basically SegWit version 1 spending rules with respect to Taproot, and it's really interesting. It allows you to hide certain conditions under which coins can be spent and so on. I'll do a read through probably this week. New spending rules for SegWit v1, validation of Taproot scripts, basically. This is how you validate a Taproot script and so on, the actual mechanics of it. So those are all very exciting. And I did read through it, which you can see right over here. Yeah, so I mean, you can go and take a look at that if you're interested in BIP 340. I already mentioned Plan B stuff. Jeremy Rubin's BIP 119. This is op check template verify. I haven't read through this completely, so I don't know. Maybe if the BIP stuff is interesting, I'll continue the series by reading through this one. The BTC Pay Vault is right here, and it talks about how to integrate it with your hardware wallet. Really, really cool stuff. Encourage you to take a look at it as well. Lightning, the LSAT post is right here from Tyrion. It was published on Medium, and you can take a look at pseudonymous authentication using Bitcoin Lightning payments. There's a whole bunch of stuff, including Bolt Wall, which I don't know that much about. But there's an LSAT playground, which in itself is interesting. You can generate the invoice and put it into www authenticate header into HTTP request, which can then be like once you pay, you can access it, which in of itself is really, really interesting. So yeah, LSAT I think will be very useful. It's an alternative to Brave, basically, right? Like Brave made their own token and all that, but instead this one will be like a Lightning paywall. So I see this as competition for that sort of thing. Stephen Livera's what crypto token velocity theorists can learn from Austrian economics. Yeah, very, very, MV equals PQ. So he's debunking that essentially. Here is the Henry Ford Energy Standard thing, again on Medium by Charles Edwards. Definitely encourage you to read that as well. And finally, this is Unchained Capital's Parker Lewis, who writes about like why we converge towards one money. That's just like, it's not many chains; it's a single chain. All right, so let's do a read through of my article debunking a deceitful BCH claim. Hopefully, if you have any questions, you can write that in chat. Let me see if there are any before I do that. Who's Steven Rivera? He does a podcast out of Australia, pretty popular. He's had a lot of different people. All right, so let's debunking a deceitful BCH claim. Oh, let me go through my Twitter first, and then we'll get there. All right, so let's see what different things. Whoa, that was a little too big. All right, so did Nakamoto.com die already? No articles for 11 days. I haven't checked in a few days. See if they have any. Yeah, so they haven't published anything in 2 weeks. All that uproar and brouhaha. It sounds like they're a little gun shy at this point about publishing anything because they fear criticism. Well, we'll see where that goes. It's a great domain name. Who knows where it'll go. In the future, people won't spend so much time investing. They'll just keep their money in Bitcoin and work on building stuff. I think this was my most popular tweet this week, and it's true. If you're spending time on investing, essentially you have to go do all the research in the investments that you're making. So if you're investing in stocks, you look up their PE ratios, their leadership, their market and their competitors and all that stuff. If you're investing in real estate, you have to go through the house and examine it and see like where the location is, what the school district's like. There's just a lot of different things that you have to do whenever you're investing in anything. The only real things that you don't have to think that much about when you're investing are fungible items, kind of like Bitcoin or gold or something like that. And with gold, it's like tricky because, are you buying physical gold or are you buying an ETF, which is gold that might not exist, and so on. Once people converge on Bitcoin, I think what will happen is you'll have all this time freed up because you're not going to be investing or researching investing so much. Wealth kept in dollars is a security hole, and this is because banks essentially have your money, and if they accuse you of being a child pornographer or something, all of that money is taken away. So it's a security hole for sure. I just put, and we'll get to this in a second. Synonyms for printing money: injecting liquidity, deficit spend, raise the debt ceiling, add to the Fed's balance sheet, lower X-ray, founder reward, token sale. I think some other people pointed out a few others like quantitative easing and things like that. But these are all synonyms for printing money, and it's kind of funny how these are all euphemisms in a way, as a way to hide the fact that they are printing money indeed. There's a lot of bitter no corners out there. Don't expect that to change. And this is meant to be, kind of a reality check. The fact is there are a lot of people that are just sort of philosophically against Bitcoin and don't want to learn about Bitcoin, don't want to accept it. And they would rather that reality not exist. Economic reality is going to slap them in the face. But for a long time, I don't think that's going to change. At least until they're forced to, they're not going to adopt at least for some people. My Sunday survey this week was how many Bitcoin wallets do you own that have a balance in it? Most people, 1 to 3. That's what I expected. But 8.5%, 11 plus, which is kind of an insane number of wallets, but that's what they answered. I did do a tweet about... I'm going to, I've moved to Substack, so we'll see how it goes. I don't know, maybe I'll delete my MailChimp account or whatever. All right, so let's do a read through. Debunking a deceitful BCH claim. Zhang Zhuer of BTC.top posted a rather interesting analysis of their plan. So this is the actual plan post about, Bitcoin Cash and their funding of the ecosystem and so on. To fund BCH development with 12.5% of the BCH Coinbase award for 6 months starting in May. If you haven't seen the proposal, the idea is for the miners to form a cartel where they will orphan any blocks that don't give the developer subsidy, meaning that they have some assurance that they have at least 51%, more likely in the 70% range, to make good on this threat. The game theory on this is interesting, as BCH has a 10 block rule that will make any orphaning with less than 60% of the total BCH hash power pretty risky, but that's a post for another time. So if you click on that link, less than 60%, this is the whole mining centralization scenarios article I wrote a while back. But there's a table in here that's actually kind of useful. Basically, depending on the percentage of hash power that you have, at 60%, the expected number of blocks before you overcome the other one is about 6. So because BCH has a 10 block rule, if it reorgs more than 10, then they don't accept it, even if it has more hashing power. It can cause a serious split. So if you have like 55%, the expected number of blocks to overcome is 11 blocks. So by then, when you overcome, those nodes are going to reject it. So the game theory becomes interesting. That's something that I can talk about if you guys are interested. But that's what I was pointing to here. What I want to focus on in this article is Zhang Zhuer's claim that BTC miners are actually partially paying for this plan. The claim. Let's break down the claim step by step. Because of the hash ratio between BTC and BCH and the difficulty adjustments that maintain an equilibrium, it is the entire set of SHA-256 mining, including BTC mining, that bears the cost under this plan. The hash ratio between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash has a theoretical equilibrium point based on price. We'll use round numbers here for the sake of simplicity. If Bitcoin is worth 9,000 and Bitcoin Cash 1,000, then given the same block reward, say 6.25, then 90% of all available SHA-256 hash rate goes towards BTC and 10% towards BCH, as that's the game theoretical optimum. Miners move from BCH to BTC, they lose money in opportunity cost, same for the reverse, provided the price stays the same. Whenever the price changes, say BTC is worth 9,400 and BCH 600, BCH miners are making less money and BTC miners are making more, causing BCH miners to move from BCH to BTC. Hash ratios quickly go to 94% for BTC and 6% for BCH, as about 4% of all miners are incentivized to move to BTC. So people move based on price, and this is a well-known fact and something that's been observed for a long time. The 12.5% tax is similar to a price change. A miner that was making $1,000 a day on Bitcoin Cash now starts making $875 a day on BCH because of the dev tax. This means that the hashing power of a BCH will lessen by 12.5% given that everything else stays the same. Thus far, we have no reason to believe that BCH won't be paying the cost of 12.5% tax. In fact, BTC will get more hashing power and a more secure network at the cost of BCH hashing power and less security on their network. Assuming a static global hash rate. This is counterintuitive. With 12.5% of the coin base being donated, then on first glance, it would appear that BCH miners simply give up 12.5% of their rewards and then would lose 12.5% of their hash as well. However, after difficulty adjusts on BTC, it is a different story. So the difficulty adjustment does put some difficulty into the calculation. That's pun intended there. BCH's difficulty adjustment algorithm adjusts pretty quickly to keep the blocks at around 10 minutes. This was done because they experienced a much lower percentage of the total hash rate, and there were many 12-hour periods during the first difficulty adjustment algorithm era where they found few, if any, blocks. This was the problem with the emergency difficulty adjustment in August of 2017, where they would go through 2016 blocks in like a matter of 2 days, and then they wouldn't find a block for like 18 hours. And this is because the EDA was just designed so poorly that it ended up doing that. So what the difficulty adjustment algorithm does is make each block easier to find so that blocks continue being produced at 10-minute intervals regardless of hash rate. The algorithm has some pretty serious security vulnerabilities, but that's a post for another day. And I've mentioned this in other shows and so on, but basically what ends up happening with their current difficulty adjustment algorithm is that miners do something similar, is that they find blocks much quicker during a particular period when difficulty is easy, and then they'll leave it to sort of like the principled BCH people who will mine blocks even at a loss in some ways, and like economically, in order to keep the chain going. Assume round numbers for this illustration. BTC is 97% hash and BCH 3%. If BCH gives up 12.5% of its reward, that 3% goes to about 2.6%, and BTC would go to 97.4%. 0.375% of the total SHA-256 rewards are being pulled out of the entire system, but this cost will be split between BTC and BCH in the same ratio as the hash. 97 to 3. The BCH hash rate will be diminished by 12.5%, but Bitcoin mining will bear 97% of the cost of the diminished profitability because there will be more hash competing for the same Bitcoin rewards. So here's the meat of the argument. Essentially, Jiang is arguing here that Bitcoin miners are actually bearing the brunt of the cost because more hashing power is needed per block after Bitcoin's difficulty adjusts to reflect the new miners coming in from Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin Cash, some number moved because it's not as profitable on Bitcoin Cash. Great. Now there's more on Bitcoin, and his argument is that'll just make Bitcoin miners all bear that cost. But here this is the argument. First order effect. To illustrate the deceitfulness of this argument, let us use an extreme example. Say 90% of the reward is going towards Bitcoin Cash developers. If BTC BCH hashing power is split 97 and 3 before the reward goes into play, 90% of the miners on BCH immediately leave after the reward goes into play. The hashing power split becomes 99.7 and 0.3. The difficulty on BCH quickly adjusts to allow 0.3% of all SHA-256 hashing power to mine a block in 10 minutes. The hashing power on BTC eventually adjusts to allow 99.7% of the total SHA-256 hashing power to mine a block in 10 minutes. So BCH gets easier, Bitcoin gets harder. That's essentially, that's the big thing about it. So what's changed here? 99.7% of mining has to compete for the same rewards as 97% before. So there's roughly 3% less reward on a per hash basis. Same for the 0.3% in BCH, as Jiang has pointed out. As far as the reward analysis goes, this is true. Seems like a free lunch paid for by BTC, as Jiang is asserting. But there are second and third order effects, which I'm pointing out here. But there are further second order effects here. 3% more miners on the BTC network mean that the profitability has changed, and the miners at the margin will now no longer make a profit. If all the costs and prices stay the same, the miners whose profit margin is less than 3% of the reward will simply stop mining their miners. In other words, supply of hashing power will react to the reduced demand. Depending on how many miners are operating at the margins, the amount of hashing power dropping out may be more than 3% or less than 3%. If it's more than 3%, the difficulty will adjust again and equalize at a level that's actually more profitable than before the whole dev tax began to the miners on BTC. If it's less than 3%, the difficulty will adjust and equalize at a level that's less profitable than before the whole dev tax began to the miners on BTC, but more profitable than the simplistic situation Jiang outlined. Of course, making it 3% easier will bring back those marginal miners as a third order effect, but this is why claims like this are ridiculous. You can't examine just the first order effects and claim the cost is being paid only by those. In other words, there's some miners that are going to leave because it's too difficult and they're not making enough margin. So they're going to leave, and they're not, and it's that in turn is going to make it more profitable. So they'll make the money back. So it's a very very deceitful analysis for that reason. Furthermore, BCH is paying out the same 6.25 BTC per block for 87.5% of the security as before the dev tax. The BCH network is essentially paying their miners the same amount for less work so they can pay the developer. So, if you're paying a security guard, it used to be you're paying like 100 security guards to, patrol your building or something like that. Now you have like 87 of them, right? Like that's essentially what you're doing. It's can they do as good a job? Maybe, but now you have more vulnerabilities and so on. And who pays for the BCH network? Well, it's really the holders of BTC. They are the ones whose percentage of BCH is being reduced by inflation. In a proof of work system, the inflation and fees pay for the security. So everyone that owns BCH, they are being inflated every block, right? Like by, right now it's 12.5 BCH, but later it'll be 6.25 BCH. Essentially, their percentage of BCH gets reduced because of the slight inflation that's happening with every block. But and why they're doing that is because they're getting security out of it. The holders of BCH are getting less security for the same dilution, and that's bad. That's awful. That's what makes it That's what makes it a bad deal for the BCH people. Consequently, exchanges and merchants will need to increase the number of confirmations needed by 14%, which is 1 divided by 1 minus 12.5%, to get the same level of security against double spending attacks, slowing everything down. So in order to be sure that you get the same level of security, if you had 6 confirmations, you require 6 confirmations, now you're going to require 7. That's going to slow everything down. In a coin supposedly focused on transacting frequently, this is a strange trade-off to be making. And indeed that is, because if you want to transact frequently, well, one of the biggest places that you're going to want to transact with are exchanges and merchants. So why would you do this? Conclusion: the cost to BCH is not just Bitcoin is going to pay 97% of it. As I've shown, there are a significant amount of cost and security and second order effects. Zhang's argument is the equivalent of saying if Canada raises taxes, it's actually the US that pays for most of it. With the logic being that anyone who leaves Canada will go to the US and cause more competition in the US labor markets that will allow Canadians staying to make that money back. This is theoretically true if examining cherry-pick first-order effects, but those effects are only a small part of all the consequences. What BCH is doing is removing a part of the market for the SHA-256 hash power, which is, of course, their proper prerogative to do. Essentially, they are lowering the demand for all SHA-256 hashing power with the death tax. By this cherry-pick logic, changing the proof-of-work algorithm or killing proof-of-work altogether would be even better, since then SHA-256 power has to all go to other places, making BTC mining less profitable, at least on a cherry-picked first-order basis. The short-sightedness of this policy is truly something to behold. Well, all right, so basically what we're saying is that demand for SHA-256 hash power goes down with this death tax, but the supply is going to react, right? Like it's going to be miners that can't operate on a profit anymore that are going to drop out, or maybe even like new manufacturing equipment, manufacturing of mining equipment. The demand isn't going to be as strong because the demand for SHA-256 hash power isn't as big. So that's what's going to happen. The short-sightedness of this policy is truly something to behold. What are they going to do after 6 months if this tax policy is successful? See, right now they're planning for it to go from May to December, something like that, and they're only going to do it for 6 months, and apparently that's going to raise roughly $6 million at the current valuation of BCH. But what if it's successful? Right? Like what are you gonna do? Like you put yourself in a position after 6 months having to decide whether to pay them or not, and what are the metrics by which you're going to measure? At that point, every BCH developer is going to be very used to getting fed from that teat. And what are they going to do? Are they going to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess we didn't achieve our goal, so you should stop paying us? I don't think so. They're going to get very addicted to this money, and that's going to be the consequence of it. So what are they going to do? Well, most likely they're going to have to continue it. But then you continue it, and then it becomes kind of like the U.S. budget, right? Like you have this line item that like nobody really knows what it does, but it keeps being in there because it was in there last year. And this is how a lot of budget items in the U.S. federal budget continue to exist, despite nobody knowing what the hell they are. That's what this is going to be like. And so like, after the next halving, it's like 3.125. They're going to want the same reward, right? Like they're not going to be like, well, I don't want to cut. This is what happens with every department in any government, is that they don't want to cut. So they're going to keep wanting 12.5% of 6.25, which is going to be 25% of 3.125. And then the halving after that, it's going to be 1.6125. And for 6.0, whatever it is, it's going to be even less. It's going to be 50% of that one. And then the halving after that, it's going to be 100%. So it quickly becomes this weird, untenable situation where the Dove subsidy will either have to be shrunk or the mining reward will have to be shrunk. And developers are, if you've had it for like 12 years, are you really going to give that up? Probably not. Maybe they'll accept a little cut or something like that, but this is going to be a major fight. And I can't imagine that this is going to like end up with anything but some sort of inflation, which is what I'm saying at the end. Do the miners screw over the developers by ending the subsidy, or is BCH just going to change their inflation schedule to fund both miners and developers? And this is what central governments always end up doing, is that they come to a point where they don't want to cut anything. They don't want to upset anybody. So instead of being fiscally responsible, they just inflate their troubles away. And I suspect that BCH will do exactly the same thing. This policy has the potential for a whole lot of drama, and I, for one, will be getting some popcorn. Yeah, indeed. This is something that we're going to be something that's going to do something with BCH. I mean, already there are rumblings. I'll probably share like Peter Rison's concerns about this. There's probably another split in BCH coming or something like that. So this is not good news, folks. Not good news. All right, so I've gone through all of this. Let me show some of my stuff again. Again, if you want to learn programming blockchain, or at least the blockchain level of Bitcoin, right? Like this is the base layer. You can come to Las Vegas, February 20th, 21st. This is in conjunction with Unconfiscatable, where I will be for February 22nd and possibly the 23rd, though probably not the 23rd. And it's in Las Vegas. There's a conference and a poker tournament and so on. My book, The Little Bitcoin Book, is out and available on Amazon in at least Spanish and Portuguese, along with audiobook and so on. The other book that I have is Programming Bitcoin, which is available on Amazon as well. And this one is going to be $41. It's also available in Korean. The next conference I'm going to be at is, I believe, next week. I can't believe it's coming up so soon. London, February 6th and 7th, Advancing Bitcoin Developer Conference. It's for developers, and I am definitely on there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Please come and support your fellow developers. All right, let's see if there are any questions. Is there anything else cool about that BIP 340 will enable that people aren't talking about? Yeah, that's a good question. So there is, but you're gonna have to wait until Segwit version 2. So Segwit version 1 is Taproot, and that's being worked on right now. But Segwit version 2 is going to be incredible, because what we're going to get probably around then is something called cross-input signature aggregation. Now, that might be a bunch of word salad to you guys, but basically what that allows is, right now, for every input, so this is a UTXO that you're spending, you have to provide a pub key and a signature. What Taproot does is it brings the pub key back to the output, so you only have to provide a signature per input. So that's more efficient, right? And that'll be better for the block space and transmission and running a full node and so on. What cross-input signature verification does, or cross-input signature aggregation does, is it takes all of those signatures and makes them into a single signature, one signature. So instead, if you have 100 inputs, instead of 100 signatures, you have one. And why is that useful? Well, first of all, it's going to take up less block space, especially if you're an exchange or something, or if you have a lot of dust outputs that you need to spend or whatever. It's a lot more efficient. But the bigger and more interesting thing is that it financially incentivizes coin joins. If you want to send some money to somebody, it's going to be cheaper for you to do a coin join with a lot of other people rather than creating your own transaction. Why is that? Well, because it's going to take up less block space. you don't have to have a 64-byte signature into your transaction anymore. Instead, you put it into a coin join transaction, and you get the same input, same output, same thing, but fee-wise, it's going to be significantly cheaper than your own transaction. And because of propagation and so on, it's more likely to get through, and fee estimation is going to be better, and so on. So that is going to be an amazing thing, but we're going to have to wait until SegWit v2. But there are a lot of cool things, and if you haven't read onshore signatures and sort of MuSig and all of that, there's some really interesting things that you can do with that I think are still being explored to a degree. The fact that multi-sig can be entirely hidden is a huge thing, but people haven't figured out, okay, what can I do with this yet? And until it's out, it's not going to really be out there. So anyway, hopefully that's good for you, and you've learned something. I always enjoy doing this show with you guys. Please take a look at all of the conferences and things like that I will be doing. There will be a scholarship form out pretty soon. Fiat delenda est. This song is